So we'll get started then. Brian, start. I'll call the meeting to order of the Budget and Finance Committee. I don't know if you have your own committee that you need to call to order.
I'll call to order.
And just to let everybody know, the microphones are connected to our AV booth in the back. Several people asked if we could record this, so we're going to record the session. As we see on the agenda, this is just discussion, kind of a workshop format with Tony from our finance team and the Budget and Finance group, your finance teams, everybody to work through some, revenue projections. And then the second part of the agenda is maybe to set a couple of dates, potential dates to talk about expenses and capital planning. Just to try to get ahead of the cycle while it's still quiet. You guys have 6,000 kids coming back to school in a few weeks, and we don't. And several people asked that we get these workshops and discussions underway so that when we get to the actual budget resolution period, which I've always authored in the fall, and then finally into the budget cycle itself, that we're a little bit ahead of the curve coming up. Everybody knows that's always a difficult time to work out all the numbers. So I don't know where we didn't really set a starting point. It's more an interactive discussion, I think, rather than anything else. If anybody suggests a time limit, that's fine. Thinking like maybe an hour and a half at the most. Tim?
Yeah, that I don't think. Could I just have one member of the audience be on our finance committee now and served on the Bridgewater Rainham School Committee if he'd like to come up to finance and have a part at the table. if that's okay with us, and then if it's okay with
you don't know what you're asking.
That's good with me.
If that, I'll make that in the form of a motion. Budget finance.
That's fine. Unanimous on that.
Okay. And you guys mind? Okay.
On up.
Yeah, I didn't. This is the first time we've done this. What, 8 years, something like that, as a council forum. So, I didn't mean to exclude the
I know, and
finance
I'm
committee.
really excited. I'm the public today.
Figured Tony has most of the numbers that we want. Would get something with finance. Any other?
Good.
Yeah. Okay, and I appreciate it. I would like a discussion. That's my objective. So,
Mr. Gallagher, is it okay if I ask questions?
I have a question.
I'm the chair here, so yes.
He's the chair of this meeting.
Please,
but I defer
not every
to
5
the
seconds.
just chairperson of the council subcommittee.
Is everybody okay with
Would
kind of
still
the
be
format and the objective for tonight?
But if I could just add to that, Bill, and I do think that the Budget and Finance Committee has a role in the budget process. There's no question about it. But I think that the school department, school district has a role, a much more important role to build a budget, not based really on, we shouldn't be helping them develop.
No, we're not.
We should be, right. This should just be like a working session. They have a role and responsibility to the district to provide the best budget they think possible for the students of the district.
Oh, absolutely.
Understanding revenues might not be budgets might not be what they want or what they ultimately get. But I think that understanding that this isn't process that we're starting to kind of send signals or hints to all departments, not just the schools, that the revenues might not be there and so forth. So this is a good starting point, but I just think it's important that we're not helping them develop their budget. They need to do what they have to do, as they have always done.
And Dennis, I think it's important that we start from the same back set and the same level set of what we think down. And so the school committee, committee in the district can go into discussions and say, okay, well, this is what they think they have, but, you know, that's one input to the equation that we're going to put together. But as long as everyone understands and starts with the same fact set, then that's going to be, I believe it's going to be a much stronger. That's why we're doing it.
Yeah, and I know everybody probably knows everybody in the room, but those that might be watching, if anyone watches, probably doesn't. So why don't we do quick introductions around Bill Wood, Chair of the Budget and Finance Committee on the Town Council.
Tim Fitzgibbons, Precinct 2, Town Council.
Dennis Gaylor, Councilor at Large, President of the Council.
Tom Conley, District.
Philadelphia School.
Kathy Macedo, Riverside.
Susan Prandowski, School Committee.
Tony Salmonte, Finance Director for the Town of Bridgewater.
Julie Scaparis, Public, but Town Finance Committee.
Did you guys have any comments that you want to make before our numbers?
So this process is really what we use with all of our departments, with our revenues, and we have a forecasting meeting at the beginning of every fiscal year. And before you look at the overhead, so do I. We do have a technician out back. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. I know better. There are 5 major revenue categories. First is your property tax. The second, folks are familiar with, is your state aid. The third is your local receipt. And then we have internal funds that we use from other funds to support the general fund, the largest being the ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation. That's a considerable offset to the fire operation. The process, we've tightened up. I think you realize it this year, the new growth in the property tax. In past, the new growth figure, we weren't able to provide you a solid number. It was more of an estimate, therefore more conservative, until sometime after the budget process. This year, for the first time since I've been here, we've tightened up the process with our outside assessing company. And as of April 15th, we had a much more accurate, short of property tax, because that's a little different animal. The state controls some of that valuation. But we were able to tighten that up so that we came from a $500,000 original estimate for new growth to a $700,000. So we were able to come up with an additional $200,000, and that came from the fact that we're trying to improve our estimating processes. For the public's edification, 2.5% of last year's property tax was billed on all the property tax bills, is the other component of the increase to our property. So we feel going into the FY21 budget process that we're going to have tighter numbers, starting with a conservative figure in our 5-year forecast, but knowing that 4/15 would be the late date, and I will be trying to push up our outside provider to get that by 1st of April, so that we can always roll that number and be more accurate with what. As you know, the state then, for the state revenue, they determine what the 2 big pieces of the state revenue is: your unrestricted general fund revenue, used to be called the lottery. That number is provided to us. Last year, it started out with the governor's 2.75% increase. That's where it stayed. Okay. This governor, since he's come on board, has been extremely disciplined, and at least on the unrestricted general fund aid in his projections, which respects what the cities and towns have to do in the budget planning process. So that was the number that it started with. The year before it was 3.5. Last year it was 2.75. We anticipate that number to be 2.7 or less going forward. I'll speak to some of our local receipts graphically that shows that we are, my perspective, an end of a high, say recovery, because I'm not an economist, but local receipts I think have peaked, and I think I'll point to that. So the local receipts part is where we do a lot of analytical work, and there's a lot of comments and conversations around whether or not we should be less conservative, more conservative. It's the only group of revenue that we have some control over in our estimating processes. So obviously we would throttle that up and throttle that down to ensure that we have reserve, just like the school and their planning process at the end of each fiscal year. They hope to have reserves. They use that as part of their budgetary process. That's a conservative approach because we know that when the water gets shut off, so to speak, metaphorically, it gets shut up real quick. And we know 90% of all of our to revenue, salaries and benefits. So we have to be very, very cautious. The last is the offsets for general fund expenses. That's the transfers. Our enterprise funds, we service them with collections, accounting, and auditing, and so forth. So there's a transfer from those funds to offset the related costs in the general. As well as I mentioned, the other large number is the ambulance fund. I won't go into details, but strategically, management, town manager, fire chief have done an exceptional job over the last 5 years to move from a SAFER grant that was funding 8 firefighters to an ambulance program that has increased over $1 million seats. And it has nothing to do with me whatsoever. It has everything to do with and how they're running the operation. We've been very conservative in using those ambulance receipts to support that operation and to continue the revenue stream. But those two are in the transfers. So those are a lot like offsets to our operating budget. So in essence, those are the 4 buckets. Any questions on that? Most individuals in this room are pretty familiar with that? So the reason I'm starting with the local receipt, again, is because this is where a lot of I'll show you a summary document and you'll get a handout, a takeaway that has to do with total revenue projections are 4 years and what we anticipate the revenue sharing to be with the school department over the next 4 years. But I just wanted to point out why I think we're at the top of the revenue stream. So I'm going to show you, I think it's 5 of the revenue categories in local receipts that drive 96% as last year of our revenue. There's a number of other small revenue accounts in local receipts, but they don't drive the revenue. And the first major driver, which probably represents 80%, and I'm rounding. As you can see, we went through a flat period between 2015 and 17, and in 18 and now 19, we are finally seeing it flatten back out again. So what we saw in 2019 is that the increase in the commitments for motor vehicle excise only went up 2.3%, whereas prior years we were seeing double-digit increase. Okay? So we see that starting to flat out. Our meals, room tax, and boat excise tax had a high point or close to a high point in 18, and we're seeing that flat. So those are 2 revenue streams that are connected to the economy. You don't have to be an economist to know that at some point you can only buy so many new cars. You can only add so many cars to your pool, and at some point those things are going to start to flatten out. The other thing you can see is there is some volatility in these numbers. Some point I don't have prior to 2014, those numbers were even lower.
And Tony, it cratered in 2008-9.
Correct. Yeah, it was a delay. So what will typically happen is the economy will do this, and then the revenue delay. That's why I'm always planning for the revenue delay a few years before the revenue, because you have to position yourself accordingly. So now we look at the penalties and interest on tax. So you can see 2018, one of the things that came up in the council meeting was, why did we have such high penalties and interest on taxes? Because we started to, since I came on board, I have been able to put together, with the support of the town manager and the council, a great staff, and our treasurer collector came on board in late 18, and with his efforts and the staff's efforts, we were able to work on a lot of our tax title property. We made some major headway. So a lot of the revenue was one-time revenue because we had such a backlog of tax title properties that we hadn't collected on. And that was what I pointed to the council when that went to our free cash. It was high because it was a one-time. And as you can see, it's gone from 698 last year, 699 down to 413. That's a combination of many of the penalty and interest categories, but the number one driver pushing that back down is that one-time revenue isn't there. So from the outsider looking in, when we were planning our 2019 budget and 2020 budget, one might have been inclined to stay high up towards the 600,000 and change, but that wouldn't have been prudent. So here's an example of what in fact happened. On the fee side, what we're seeing is a slight increase. And the reason we're seeing that is, again, we have certain operations that weren't collecting some fees or performing some of the services that have been performed in the past. You know, as well as anyone, when you lose 2 or 3 key people, there's not a lot of backfilling that can go on. You kind of try to go into survival mode and you do the most important things. And unfortunately, in a municipal government, if you go back to 2008 and 9, when the headcount rolled, they saw a reduction in the assessor's office. Well, from a business standpoint, you never want to reduce that. You want to make sure you're out there gathering all your new growth. You don't want to reduce your administrative staff that's out there generating fees, because in fact, you're cutting the bodies that are collecting the revenue. But that's what happens, unfortunately, because we run lean and mean. So in this case, what we're seeing is, I think we're going to see a flattening out in 2020 in our fees. Now, license and permit is where it gets scary from a projection standpoint, because it looks like we just had a windfall in 2019 of an additional $300,000 worth of revenue. That's from 2 projects. That's from the new apartment building, okay, which we have collected the entire fee or permit, and some housing that's going on. I don't know the name of the developer, but there's a number of housing units. Those 2 projects account for $466,000. I think that. So, and I know that has a whole host of other implications, because these are where families are going to live. So that said, that's why I have to look at inside the numbers for license permitting, because this can do this. Sure, please.
The apartment in Hellwing Pool.
I mean the 400 and some odd unit.
Summit Ave.
Yeah.
Yeah, not McElwain. No.
Across from the NIP.
It's not McElwain.
Not McElwain. No.
Yeah. Across from the NIP.
I can get the info after and send it to you to be more exact. I apologize.
Tony, if I could say, is it fair to say that these numbers are pretty much actual numbers that were received
19
as revenue?
That's correct.
So it's also fair to say that these aren't necessarily the numbers that we used in the budget.
They are not.
Right.
But what I'm attempting to do is show what's happening with our revenue stream. Yes,
Because
please.
basically, once those properties are done, that's one-time hit with.
Yes. And that's why it's so we have to be so conservative on something that's more volatile there. And it has to flow to free cash. That's why we want to share that for capital expenditures, because when it's there, we use it. When it's not there, we don't have to go to cut budget. So that's been the thought process. So as you can see, though, if I just upload, if you look at those major categories, you can see in FY over there, you can see us flattening out. And that's what I've been planning for the last 2 years. There's a small increase. So yes, we may have another year where our free cash from local receipt is being flooded, but this is where it's going to start, in my estimation.
I get the licensing and the permits, but for the developer, does the town ever work out any type of long-term like mitigation where, other than the property tax that you're going to collect from the tax on that, but an actual mitigation from the developer who's going to make quite a bit of money on these projects to kind of put aside either, I don't know, towards free cash, we call it free cash, or something that you can kind of tap into in lean years when you're kind of flat?
Well, I can't speak to that. I don't know of any formal program or process. What we have been doing, we look at the reserve that we have in our stabilization fund, which is $5.2 million, as a shared reserve, because it supports, it's a revenue stream for when we run into our economic that is less benefit. So that's how we've been dealing with that. There are some mitigation that may occur, but there hasn't been anything significant.
Just because I know I've just spoken to folks in other communities that have a lot of construction going on, like Freetown, in and around Fall River area. I know that they work the developer, knowing that impact is going to, like you're saying, it's going to flatten out. It's not going to have those licensures or permits anymore, but they know that it's going to have an impact on municipal departments. They work out a mitigation so that not only with the incoming of the increased taxes, property taxes, but also kind of have somewhat of a reserve short term for hiring of additional fire, police. I just didn't know.
That would be a good question to direct Jennifer. All right.
But we don't
Jennifer.
do. But we don't do that.
Jennifer's
I know
our-
we don't do that.
Yeah, but Jennifer's our community and economic planning, so she's probably the better one to answer that question.
So my last comment, though, is that $466,000 that is coming from those projects, that will, over the next year or so, convert into real estate. There's a lot of receipt for additions and roofs and siding. That doesn't convert to real estate taxes. Because when you go out and value a home and revalue a home, you have to take into consideration appreciation from the year before on the existing property, and there isn't a one-for-one correlation between. But if it's a new construction, it is in fact going to convert into. Okay. So I wanted to give you that as an overview, because we can go through all the different categories, and I'm going to give you my general assumptions in the major categories. That's what I have here. And you're going to get a document that is reflective of the next two that you're going to see. Take those with you. They're all here ready to go. So in the levy limit, we are planning on, for projected purposes, $500,000 for new. Last year, we started with $500,000 new growth, and we were able to come up with another couple $100,000. So we will know sometime in April what that number will do. That represents really, that plus the 2.5%, that's calculation. Last year's levy plus 2.5 plus new growth. That's what we have as a net change to share. The excludable debt and this debt and that debt, it's an in and an out. It's just an add-on to the tax bill and it goes out. So it's a walk. So really the big numbers to look at are right here, the total levy limit, less allowances for abatements and exemptions, which money we're not going to collect, abate or exempt some property tax bills. And then because of the way the system works, rounding, we never get to zero, meaning collecting 100% of our levy. Get 50. Because you're talking about billions of dollars worth of value. The state,
So we're collecting every possible dollar in property tax.
yeah, I think that's important. We max out the levy. The town, as a practice and a policy, is they go to the maximum allowable levy. Other communities may not have to do that, and they can still fund their operating budget.
So I spoke before about the budget resolution. Been doing almost since we formed as a council. I don't know if anybody's seen the budget resolution. I've usually been the one that introduced it. People have contributed to language. But this year, I think what we'd like to do is get the finance committee involved much more heavily, maybe with collaboration with others. 6 or 7 years ago, when we had zero reserves, we took a very conservative approach. So the numbers that Tony we're talking about, we set policy where we said 85% of last year's actual numbers was what we used in the forecast. And then the number that we just talked about for the new growth, we set it down to like 300 because we had no idea, what the actual was going to come in after 2008. Sometimes building goes strong, interest rates are low, builders build, pay fees, sometimes taxes. But then on the other side, you get people that aren't paying taxes. You end up with negative free cash because things are in tax court or whatever else. So every year we've put that together. It changes year to year. Last year, we changed the language dramatically from the 85% to something where we tried to estimate what we wanted for free cash. And I think we set the mark at 1.75% of the whole budget, free cash. With the move for the supplemental budget, actual is probably less than that. And it's up to the council when we get to the budget resolution side. Of course, I think everyone in the room understands the importance of capital planning. Can be a session. And that's where that 1.75 would fall into. We also have a free cash policy, which I know Ms. Gibbons worked on, and we reviewed last year also. So when it comes out as free cash, we have a policy that we're. But I think we'll work with the finance committee this year, try in the October time, since it was.
And just to echo on Bill's, the 85% number was essentially told to us by our auditors. We had no money in the bank. The way to start to build up a little bit of a reserve fund is estimate conservatively. That's what they asked us to do. So we followed their recommendation to be able to do that. I think if anyone heard the last auditor's report here, I think they were very pleased with where the town's gotten to in a relatively short period of time. And, aren't recommending those policies.
So the next group you'll see is the state receipts, as I stated earlier. We get a Chapter 70 reimbursement for the out-of-district regional students. Been hovering around 70, 80,000. That's an offset cost, but it's part of our revenue stream. The unrestricted general government, that was I referred to, used lottery. I used 2.5% in 21, 22, 23, and 20. Last year it was 2.7. These other items are offset. $69,000 that I'm pointing to now offset the allowances for abatements and exemptions. State, when we adopt some of the general laws for the exemptions, state reimburses us some of that. You'll see in the revenue sharing on the next tab that I show you, we offset that allowances for abatement and exemption because we do get a revenue in portion of that.
So, Tony, just to do the air math, we go back to general government, 3.9.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So you're saying you're projecting an increase of 2.5.
Correct.
If it ends up being 2.7%, I believe, the air math, that works out to somewhere around $1,000 increase in your estimate, general government. It's not a number that's 10,000. It's not a number that's in the hundreds.
No, 2.5 versus 2.7. It's not significant at all. And state-owned land is just that. State owns land in Bridgewater, not SU. We receive benefit state tax for that because we pay a revenue prop. No, that's just, I don't believe that, I don't know that the prison is part of it. Oh, this is the way the state works. They go out and they have all this land that's valued throughout, that they own in the municipalities. They start with an assessed value. Over the last few years, we've actually sold properties to the state, forestry, that they wanted. So they've taken them on board. They do a mathematical equation and say, your percent of the valuation is this. Okay? Bridgewater's valuation for that land is, say it's $20 million of $20 billion, some number like that. And then they say, well, this is the budget we have to share for state-owned land. You get your. So each year they.
Which is
they
nowhere near
calculate
what
that.
the property tax rate times the value of the property would be, right?
So that's that number, and it's pretty consistent. We did see a bump last year, and this does reflect the bump that we received, but then it will flat for a number of years. Economics are change. You would think that they would take what they distributed year one and just same plus something, but they actually back into typically how the state operates. All right. So I'm not going to get into any sort of analytical notes, but on your document, you'll see that over here you'll have some assumptions. When you get the doc, I will walk through some of the major ones in the local receipt so that you can get a sense. So let's just take a look at motor vehicle excise tax. So I bumped up FY21 by about $200,000. And that was after looking at the 6-year average, which is 3,463. Our high was this past year. Our low was $2,008,000. That was in FY14.
The only good thing there is half the people now lease their cars. So it's like this, the gift they keep giving every year. They buy it out.
Yes, we have some real good statistics on that. We're running around 46, 50%. So what that does mean is that continues, and they look at a vehicle, those purchasing it as an expense during economic downturns, they may continue to use a lease vehicle as their purchase. That will hold your revenue better during those times. We haven't been through that because I speak to the generation of 3 children, 37, 35, 33. They both have 2 vehicles. One of them has one has 2 lease vehicles, one has 1 lease vehicle. They're of that generation, and they're never driving anything that I drove when I was raising. So that's a priority. So again, that could hold for us. So you can see why I'm using a flat line, 3,000,004 across the meals, 310. 6-year average is 329. Our high was 362, and that was just this past year. Our low was 14. I'll give you a one or two other as examples, but they're all listed here. We're giving you some averages. We're giving the high. We're giving you the low. And you can take a look at the S. One of the things we're going to ask the finance. How would you, what's your, we have a debate every year regarding whether we're being aggressive. But I think the first graphics I showed you show that we're hitting that top. So being conservative is what, fortunately, I have to do. Then we break down, just so you know, we break down the excise tax into 3 categories. We have our regular property excise tax. We have our tax title, that's that dip that I pointed to because that's that one-time revenue. We have motor vehicle excise. That's penalties and interest. That's very high this year. And the reason it's high this year, again, is we have gotten that process completely streamlined in FY19. We may see an improvement in FY20 because the registry now allows us, with the new automated system, we're going to be able to do monthly billing. Typically, it was about every 3 months, your system, but now we can go in there monthly and we can download the information from their system and bill. So that could increase our cash flow, certainly our cash flow. But again, all you're doing is collapse period in time where you're going to recognize that. So that's just something to know. So if I come over here, you can see that the 6-year average is 151. We did have a high of $200,000 this year. And that's, again, most because of what I just go back to license and permits. These are the ones that are variable. I'm using 400,000. That's the building, wiring, plumbing, and so forth. The other licenses and permits category is really just common vic license, alcohol license, those recurring licenses. And that's what we're doing a little bit more to, is separating our revenues, because unless you go up in the alcohol license fee, you can't expect that to grow. So decisions now can be made more effectively. If you want to increase some of those fees that are offsetting costs, then you have to build in a process to evaluate and or make recommendations to change those. So you can see I talked about the license and permits.
And so,
yes.
Tony, just as a thought, we could increase the common vic, et cetera, to the extent that health has to go in, inspections and the cost of the Board of Health goes up. There could
way
be
to offset.
Way to offset that, so to speak.
Yep.
And it's something.
Absolutely. And then 6-year average, I just wanted to be, the high was 833. And that's why, remember, I showed you the interest number was like $1 million. Excuse me, license and permits was $1 million. You can see this year was 833. That's what drove that number up. So that in a summary is what we do within all these categories. We look at these assumptions, and really it's quantifying and qualifying. It's the qualifying it that I have a good sense as to. I think I suffered through the economy like a lot of people in this room. So we've been through the cycle. I flinched a little bit. I'm always conservative about what's going to happen. But if we look at our revenues, you can see on the local piece top out. And then down below, I referred to the transfers, receipts reserved for appropriation, ambulance. I anticipate $1,793,000 next year. We have some other offset. That was the offset for enterprise fund costs, general fund. So that's something that we use to defer some of the costs that we incur for accounting, finance, legal, auditing, and all those things. So you'll get that document, and that's what we will be publishing as of now. Now that we've held something like this, anytime it gets updated to be published for any other forum, finance committee meeting, we will make that available to the group so that we all feel that we're marching ahead with the same figure.
Go
Please.
back. Take out.
No. We haven't done that since I've been here.
Well, I disagree. we all the time we vote on expense and we cash it. Hey, I mean, we don't use it in the budget.
For operating. He asked me for the operating budget.
So,
Oh,
Oh, no, he's just talking about operating budget.
oh, yeah, okay.
No, no, no,
All
no.
right.
In fact, it might be helpful, I don't have it with us, but we should probably give you a copy of the free cash policy. There's like 7 or 8 buckets that, so whatever amount comes in as certified free cash gets split by percentages into those reserves. And then from the reserves, we'll make a transfer out to whatever the capital
One time.
expense.
Quick question in regards to free cash versus a stabilization
Yeah.
fund. How do you differentiate where money's going? And is that what's on the bottom line at the end of a fiscal year? That's what you'd certify to free cash. But is
Right.
there a portion that you would then certify to stabilization, and how do you do?
So I present, based on the guidelines in the free cash policy, I present the results of operation, and I do a crosswalk that shows here's where the surplus came from. Some of it came from operating budget, all right? Some of it came from local receipts. Some of it came from one time, all right? The driving force since I've been here, and this year will be the first time it's not going to be the major driver in our free cash allocation, was to get our stabilization fund, that rainy day fund, up to a point where we felt comfortable. All right? So now we've talked about it. The policy hasn't been looked at, but we want to maintain that relationship, that correlation. So let's say it's 12.5% of our operating budget, 10% of our operating budget. If our operating budget goes up 3%, we would want to add that 3% in the next year to maintain that integrity in that figure. Then the next thing is, what do we have for a capital plan? So that's when we look seeking input from all the departments, including the school. What's your capital plan? Because that's another major funding. We have OPEB, where we have a minimum requirement that we're putting in right now, okay, of about $100,000 to $140,000 a year. We're doing that just to show we're in compliance and making some funding attempt there. But for the most part, we know that, and the auditors concur, that the major funding for that will happen when the unfunded pension liability is taken care of, because that's going to free up a lot of money. So I'm going around and around. The big bucket is stabilization. The next one is capital stabilization. And then we have OPEB, and then what's kind of left over within the policy guidelines. And of course, the vote is actually the reflection of the policy plus the will of the council. It goes into those stabilization funds. And then it requires a vote and an order and a process so that it's completely transparent.
Part of the municipal budget is a percentage to go to stabilization.
It was part of the budget resolution, that's correct. Yes.
And just to put it out there, Tony, and you are wrong, I believe what we're trying to maintain is a stabilization fund that can carry us through a 2 or 3 year downturn. I mean, what's the number that we're aiming? We basically try to not have layoffs even when we go down a bit.
Bless you. Yeah, in my mind, you could consume that real quickly. So it's going to have to be a 3-pronged approach to making sure. But we're talking 2.5, 3 years. We're looking for 3 years out of that, plus other things that would need to do.
There is no free cash right now.
Mm-hmm.
It all goes into
One of those
stabilization or capital.
Or OPEB.
So we'll get fiscal 20 pretty soon, fiscal 19 pretty soon.
Yes, and we'll do a presentation with the results of operation, and we crosswalk it, and we do.
So right
committee.
now, at the top of your head, we have like 5 point something in stabilization.
Mhm.
what is in the capital program right
We
now?
maybe have 250, but that program is being funded by, we planned on part of the free cash to go into the funding for the next year.
Okay, that's right. But there's about $3 million in commitments, capital project, we've looked at in the last 2 or 3 years. Is
Yes.
that part of the 5.2 or is that outside the 5?
5.2 was never taken into consideration.
okay.
And again, we're only committing to the things we can commit to. Just because they're on a plan, as you know, your capital plan doesn't mean we can fund it.
So there's really about $8 million outside the budget that we're using or where we have in so-called reserves. Part of it's stabilization, part of it's capital, and the open.
And part of it,
$8 or $9 million.
if you add it all up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
I think we've done a pretty good job. Nothing's etched in stone, so obviously we need to do, and that's what finance percentages don't have what they are, but we did formalize, codify it, so that when we go through the process and our finance department is looking at percentages across the board, they have guidance as.
But perhaps, Bill, though, when the resolution gets brought forward, this might be a year, as the auditor has said, do we really need that 85% policy more?
Well, we don't have that, right. We gave that up
So
last
we can
year.
allow the finance team to, I'm not saying he doesn't put together real numbers, to put together, he doesn't have to say, oh, I got to be 85% conservative here. I can put the number I really think.
So, question?
Budget.
Well, I guess Dennis is kind of getting there. When you get to an amount that you're comfortable with in that, say, stabilization,
It is there.
Yeah.
it's there.
It's there.
So,
So-
so when you now, for future budgets, when you're looking at, are you going to now possibly allocate more monies to the municipal departments rather than to stabilization account? If you've already you feel comfortable with the number that you.
If I thought that the economy was going to grow like it did over the last 5 years, the answer would be flat out yes.
So it's only, would you say it was 5% of the budget, a little bit more than that? So you lose one of these figures on local receipts, and you're going to be committed to contracts and committed to other expenses that you can't back away from. And so that's where, at some point, some council is going to have to make the decision that part of the operating budget is using stabilization. And we've if you look at over the years, how we've tied into different things, the golf course is an enterprise fund. They should be paying for themselves through their own fees. But there have been several years, I won't count how many years, where their revenues did not meet expenses. We had to make a transfer from one side to the other side to cover their expenses. And you lose one of these numbers on the local receipts, it means big trouble. The other thing that Tony didn't really highlight is the ambulance receipt. So there's an ordinance that was set in place probably 8 years ago that says we cannot use more than $1 million for general revenue unless there's we agreed 2/3 vote of the council. So obviously revenues from ambulance receipts are meant to be used for categories including buying new equipment, some funding of operations. So that's what it's used for. So one of the things that, again, we talked with the finance committee about doing is making modifications to that policy, because I'm always worried that some year some council will decide that no, we're not going to go over the $1 million when 1.7 might be a safe number. I think it needs to be updated so there's an evolving number, maybe a percentage growth each year or something along those. As long as receipts keep coming in and keep growing the way they have been, we're fine.
I think that I think we'll all agree that we should never fund a budget through one-time revenue.
Yes.
It's a dangerous thing to say. You build your budget. We have a $300,000 shortfall. We'll just use stabilization money to fund the budget. I would never really support anything like that. However, once you set the budget, if all of a sudden the state comes in and says, oh, by the way, in January, we're going to cut your local aid by $400,000. This happened before, but we're not to that extent, but it's happened. Then maybe that particular year, instead of laying people off halfway through a year, they will use stabilization to fund that. And snow and ice removal. We know that's always a variable. We're always over in that budget. That's what stabilization will be used for, to fund that. So it's good to have that. But I think that I understand the revenue projections, and you're the expert. You look at the numbers and you know. But I don't see, and I'm not an economist either. I just don't see any slowdown in the economy.
So our revenue's flattening out to less than 1% of an increase in local receipts from prior year doesn't give you pause.
Yeah.
Well,
After double-digit
I'd be interested
increases.
to see when you close out
that's
fiscal 19 what we budgeted versus actual. That's what I like to see.
Yeah, that's not, again, and I'm being direct, that's not what I look at. Budgeting versus actual creates reserves. Now, you can challenge that through your reserve policy, and that is your will, and that's what you should do. And once I get that directive, then I'll respond in relationship to that. But if I'm looking at what the economy is doing, I'm looking at the bottom line numbers, not what we're budgeting, what's happening.
Before you carry on with the other stuff, I'd like to give the school department an opportunity to talk about their process, their revenue streams, and let's have a workshop. So.
Can I ask you a question?
Could I just ask?
I just had a question. I just want clarification on the stabilization that you're referring to for the town. Is that for all municipalities with the exception, or all departments with the exception of the school district? Because I know the school district has their own stabilization fund.
So the general
fund. One of those
fund,
buckets for the school department as well.
the general fund stabilization fund is a rainy day fund to serve the town. The school department is a portion of the town. Their budget is a percentage of the overall budget. It has been our constant communication, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that during bad times we'll draw on that as a revenue source, and we will share it like we do with any other revenue, based on the revenue. Get 49% of whatever we felt could draw down. Now that's going to be a whole host of discussions, my decision, but that's the mechanism. That fund stabilize your operation during an economic down. That's the point of that.
It was more for the audience. Thank you.
And my question was, you said you're near 5% in stabilization. Do you have a limit that you're not allowed to go above
Legally?
We're certainly not there, and we're not going to. Again, we're going to grow our stabilization fund only to the extent that our budget is grown. So let's say our budget went up a certain percentage. That delta, that difference, we want 10% of that number. Let's say the budget went up $2.5 million or $3 million. We want to add $300,000 more to that stabilization number because we're at where we want to be.
where you want to?
So that's why when the question is, will we have more money available to put into our other stabilization? That's if the council adopts that. It's not for me to say, but that's what we've been discussing, is that's what we would do.
Okay, so you've all determined that this is where you want to be, and you'll just continue to make sure that's where you'll be as the budgets increase over the years. But does the state say that you can't have so much?
So that's when the auditors report, when they come in, they show categories. And when I first came on the council, Tim and others, we were at negative $750,000 free cash because properties that hadn't been paying taxes, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And creating that policy, turn that around, taking legal action against property owners, turn that around. And so now when you look at the statewide value, we're doing pretty well, right? Mm-hmm. To go above that, we would harm operations. We would harm the district, by not using revenue coming in to fund operations and leaving enough behind to. I think the point of the stabilization is to, as Tony said, is to survive 2 or 3 years downturn where you don't have to lay off people. and you continue to have a revenue stream, maybe not from excise taxes, from stabilization, fund those contracts you've agreed to, keep the people in their offices and seats. That's so there's not a high point, but I think we're at a.
That negative 750 that you talked about when you first came on board, wasn't that around that terrible 2008? Wasn't the council formed around 2008, 2009?
Yeah,
When
we
did
were
you guys-
2011 was when we first sat.
I was just trying to figure out compared to when it was.
And
If I can, historically, there was a $2.8 million override in 2011 that got this town back on track. Another big part of it. If you do the math, 2.5% of that every single year. The difference between a stabilization fund and an override, once you use it, it's gone. There's no 2.5. There's no money coming back next year. So it sounds like a lot of money. You can burn through $5 million real quick.
and not to give Dennis bad dreams tonight or flashback, but we had that Fund 40R project, and we spent $600,000.
You haven't come knocking yet.
Yeah.
Well, because we keep filing a form every single year, and I make sure we do.
I just, and I appreciate the fact that the town wants. A regional school district is like a town, and the state allows regional to have similar accounts. We do have a stabilization account that we actually budget in the operational budget to put more money towards here, $10,000. We also have an E&D account, our free. Basically, that is what we certify at the end of the school year. When Kathy does her end of year report, we see what's on the bottom line, whether it be monies left over from the operational budget, revenues, similar to what you folks, we certify that number. What we have not been able to do, unfortunately, what I feel like the town of Bridgewater is doing a really nice job with, is we have not been able to build that number. We're able to legally have 5% of our operational budget in E&D. We never have that amount because what we do is when that money comes in at the bottom line for that fiscal year, we're already building our budget in October and looking at a number that we take from E&D, offset the overall operational budget costs to offset the assessments to the towns. So it's one of those deals where it's an economic practice now that we're almost dependent upon having monies on the bottom line to offset the next year's budget. So with that being said, we can have 5% of, the operational budget in our E&D, and, we're well below $1 million. So it's one of those deals where, and I appreciate being invited tonight. I think this is great that we're all sitting here, but I just want the towns to know that, that money that's on the bottom line at the end with operational and revenues and gets certified to E&E, but then is automatically taken out. A portion of it is taken out and put off to the next fiscal year's operational budget. So it's going to get to the point, similar to what you folks are saying here, that we may have an economic downturn and our revenues, projections come under what we projected, or we may not have as much money on the bottom line because salaries go up and whatnot. So I just want the towns to be cognizant of that fact, because it might be a time where we can't put 500,000, $1 million, 1.5 at one point we put to the next year's operational budget. So just kind of wanted to, let you folks know the economic practice that we're kind of now dependent upon to make sure that following year's budget can be offset.
I think that's a great segue, because if I'm looking at this thing right, I see line 5 is excess and efficiency appropriation of $1 million. So you had just suggested we hear from the school on the revenue, and that would be a great way to hear about it.
Looking at one of those. All right, just to go through what some of our revenues are, not a whole lot. Mainly, we have 3 different categories. We have the state categories, monies that we get are Chapter 70, which is the monies that we get for student pupils. School transportation, because we're a regional school district, we're supposed to be reimbursed at 100% for our transportation costs. I've been in this business 32 years, and I don't think I've ever seen 100%. It varies depending on state appropriation. And the other piece is Medicaid. And Medicaid, we are able to bill Medicaid for the medical services that we provide to our students. And that has changed quite a bit over the years of what's allowed, what's not allowed. And obviously the number of students and what their needs are have changed over the years as well. So there's a lot of variables that go into trying to estimate those numbers. So with our school aid,
Can I just ask a question? Like,
Sure.
how aggressive are you at getting like maximum reimbursement from Medicaid? I mean, it's really hard to deal with Medicaid. I've been in health insurance for years. I understand.
I'm going to have to give some kudos to Carla Thomas, who was with us years ago. She was our special ed director, and she was like a dog on a meat wagon. She went after every dollar that we could get, made sure that we followed all the practices. We have to do random moment time studies. She made sure everybody did them so that we'd get 100%. Even though we do everything we can, if other communities don't go after the money the way they should or go after these random moment time studies, the percentage of what everybody else can get down.
Kind of like the state. It's kind of like the state-owned land.
Yeah.
They say we're going to spend this, and you get your percentage.
And so when all of the special ed folks get together, they kind of say, "Get your numbers up, will you?" Because you're hurting us. So and Carla started that, and the staff is very well trained. And Mr. Jovelos, who is now her successor, he is on top of it as well. So we go after everything we can.
Great.
And we have to do it legally. So those are the three, so we, you just can't put something in there.
I wasn't expecting you to say you were going after it illegally.
But what we're legally entitled to, we can go after. Sometimes there's some gray areas, but we make sure that, we're not going into the gray areas. So those are the three main state revenues that we get. They're probably our largest pieces. And then we have things such as investment of funds, what we're earning in interest in our bank account. We also have this section we call other, where we kind of lump some facilities use rental fees in, because we do have some charges that are in the budget that we want to help support with some of the rental funds. If we get above and beyond what we've put here, then we put some in a revolving fund that can be used to help replace. And also in that other section, there's things like restitution or those odd things that may come in that, you just don't anticipate. The other thing we used to have when we had pay to ride were the transportation fees, and I just keep that here so that we all remember we're not having those fees anymore. We're not collecting them. They're gone. Eventually that's going to come off my little form here. But that's when we used to have pay to ride, so we won't be collecting anything there. We do have parking fees. The students at the high school who want to drive their own vehicles to school will pay a parking fee, and we estimate that around $29,000. And then we have our athletic user fees, and we've typically been around the $150,000 mark, although we did see a decline, and we believe it's some things that are coming up in the sports world as far as injuries. And so
this is operational. It doesn't include capital.
No, this is only operational.
But Tony had the bond payment. This is
no. This does not include any of that. When we do our budget, we don't talk budget and debt. We keep them separate because they are voted separate.
The number 1 and 2, the school aid and the transportation, just like for the town, you're kind of at the whim of the governor and the House budget, everything else. You probably don't know the final numbers. I think it's like April.
Well, we still don't have it.
It's still in committee now.
It's still there.
That it was in committee on Monday.
It's not a
It's in
final.
conference, it came out, but it still hasn't been finalized yet.
So-
It is like a 9-step process.
So for these numbers, when you're doing the next year, what do you do for forecast? You do percentage or just hold them to last year's numbers or what?
We looked at, we
Very
usually hold
conservative, very conservative.
We usually hold initially until we get the governor's numbers. We usually stay with the governor's numbers because over the years I have found kind of around the governor's number. Sometimes you'll see in the other numbers they start going up and they never come to fruition. So in planning, initial planning, like if I was looking at this in October, I'd figure probably go with the FY20 number for now because right now we don't have our SIMS numbers yet, our October 1 numbers to know the number of students. And I don't know how much you know about the how to figure out Chapter 70, but I had this cute little thing that somebody wrote and did it in a manner of a Dr. Seuss poem of how Chapter 70 works. It's a fun way of looking at it. It is a very complicated formula. It deals with a lot of, I think, older data because it's looking at old valuations, it's looking at income, it looks at growth factors, it's a myriad of things of both towns, so you'd have to be a genius to really figure that one out. And there's a rate when they develop the foundation budget that the state will give to you, so you don't know what that rate's going to be, and I'm sure they go through a lot of calculations to come up with those. So there's a lot of pieces we can't get our hands on until that actually comes out in January.
Formula.
No, they're working on making changes, but I don't think they've found anything yet that's going to satisfy not harming those districts that, are underprivileged or have needed extra assistance, and at the same time, giving everyone something a little better. I don't think, as I said about the transportation piece of it, it was, you'll get 100%. That's what you signed up for when you decided to become Bridgewater Rainham. But again, the caveat was subject to appropriation. So, there's only so much money for all of the cities and towns and school districts. So again, they have to try to go through that and try to figure a better way, but I think it's pretty difficult. And so what they basically do with that Chapter 70 is they're looking at what is your wealth? What can the town contribute? And then it will give you a minimum contribution plus your Chapter 70 should equal foundation.
Does that formula tend to benefit or not benefit a regionalized district, or pretty the same?
I think it's fair to all because it treats everyone the same way. It's based on exactly what the two towns are capable of doing. So I think everyone's being treated the same way.
Because I
Whether
know
you're
some
a
towns
single.
that are regionalized may not be as equal as state perceives them to be.
Mhm. Well, I think they take the actual numbers that the town
Each
will be
individual town.
giving in for their reports at their end of year. So they look at all of that. They look at all your valuations. They look at what median income is, all of those.
And I think that from what I hear from some people on Beacon Hill, that those that have floated around changes in the Chapter 70 formula, it's a catch-22, because I think if some of the proposals that are out there, I think would hurt a district like Bridgewater Rainham and more benefit the urban schools in Boston, where some say they need the money more and that we wouldn't. So it's a catch-22, and we all talk about the need to redo the formula, because if they ever did, based on what's floating on out there, I don't think we would benefit at all. I think it would hurt us.
No, and I think that's probably a lot of.
When you talk about doing
Moving
projections, you don't want to be too, aggressive there, because if they
Just
do
have-
change it,
And that's not to say when we do use the current year Chapter 70 in the early planning stages, that we couldn't get less, because there's been years where down too. So, when I look at over the years, the numbers are all over the place. not 1.47, they only went up 0.171. They're all over. So you can't say, well, they kind of go up, 1.5% every year, or it's all over. And it depends on, again, too many factors: the number of students, what's going on in the towns, the types of students that we get in. Some students, if they're special ed or low income, we get more funds for that. So there's just so many factors. So I think that's the safest way for us to initially start out. We tried to do some projecting by looking at that, but just to kind of see like what 2021 will look like, what 2022 would look like, but so on and so forth. Again, would I want to bet my life on it? No, because again, there's just too many factors.
Sometimes, well, I feel like we're always a year behind as well, because we always use the October 1 of the year previous, and that's how we base our budget. So if we did have 10, 20 special ed kids move in, or, and not that we don't want to service them, of course we do, but we have to pay for that and get the reimbursement the next year. So we always seem to be a year behind when we're doing any of these budgets, hoping that everything sort of stays the status quo. We've budgeted appropriately.
Well, one year there'll be a bunch that move out. Be aware. let's hope.
So,
Pretty good so far, yeah.
to Dr. Priwandowski's point, I every Monday morning we have management, and I ask our database manager, handles central registration, numbers of, we know what we ended the school year with, but we can never really bank on what's coming for summer enrollments. And a lot of homes are bought around this time of year with school-age children. And even now, over the summer, just in Bridgewater alone, we've had 45 students come to us that are not reflective in that seat count that Dr. Priwandowski talked about from last October 1. We have 24 students on the Rainham side. So just this, in the August tomorrow, but that's the month of end of June into the end of July. So, we're already talking about almost 70 students that have come in. And if you think about that, and they're pretty luckily distributed amongst the grade levels, but there are times when we have an influx of, say, kindergarten students that come in. That's the other roll of the dice. We really never know the kindergarten number. We can predict what next year's first grade is going to be because it's this year's kindergarten. Kindergarten coming in, we really never really know. So sometimes this year, unfortunately, we've had some kindergarten classes that had 25 to 26 kids in it. That's pretty high for that population. So again, to echo Dr. Priwandowski, that we're always kind of a year behind. And now the budget that we have to roll into FY20 with is not reflective of this additional 69 students. And again, we still have the whole month of August to go. And a lot of the homes in the Bridgewater Reserve, a lot of the homes on the Rainham side and the Rainham Reserve, we're starting to see more P&S agreements come in. So what we do is we do accept those, and we allow the parents to enroll their students until they officially go and sign. And then if it's a situation where something falls through, then obviously they have to withdraw the student and return to their home district. But it's concerning.
It's tough, but on the other side of it, tough to predict that. You do see some of the numbers. Do you see the ones that leave, the ones that you've kind of budgeted, expected, but don't? How do you track
Yeah, we do, because we run reports. We have our Power School program, and I actually ran this today, kind of see where we were. So it just kind of gives you share this with a bar graph. And then what I did then was reflected back to the end of the year enrollment sheet, which is here.
Didn't lose anyone.
Not many. So maybe of that 69, we're plus 6. I mean, it's not like, 69 left and we've got a new 69 coming in. And I have talked to realtors in town, and this is something that I've talked to the committee about too. It's when these families are selling their $350,000 home, I say to the realtor, are they now moving out to another community so the influx of the family coming in with two students and it exits two students, no, they're buying the $550,000 home. So they're staying within the community, upgrading, and the new families are coming, which is great. Both towns, I live in Rainham, I love Bridgewater. They're family-oriented towns, but that's what we're seeing. We're not seeing that, 2 for 2. 2 come in, 2 exit. They're just going to another development.
What are the numbers we're seeing on the second page?
Can I just follow up on something Kathy said a bit earlier about the foundation budget and figuring out how much both towns can afford? Just explain what does the state tell you both towns can afford?
That's when we get the minimum contribution.
Mm-hmm.
The state will go through the whole formula for each town, and then we'll determine, based on what our foundation budget is, we'll determine what each town's target share should be.
Uh-huh.
And they'll send out the minimum contribution number, which you'll see when we do our revenue,
Okay, super. Thank you.
our assessment sheet to you.
So the second page, it looks like you're tracking changes in Chapter 7 is Medicaid.
Yes. So the long page, is that what you're looking at? Yeah, so what we were doing here is trying to just look at those state revenues to try to come up with some type of a formula to go forward with estimating further beyond. And as you can see, going from the governor's budget, Chapter 70, in 16 to fiscal year 17, it only went up 0.65%.
So even though the governor's budget itself went up 2.7%, this Chapter 70 money only went up 1.44%.
For us. And then I did the same thing with fiscal year 17 and fiscal year 18, and that went up 1.43%. Fiscal year 18 as compared with 19, that was only a 0.77% increase. And then again, 19 with 20, it went up much more, 3.47%. And so to try to estimate fiscal year 21, with all that up and down, I took, to be conservative, the 2 lowest numbers and came in the middle of them. So I went with 71%.
So,
Could it be more? Sure.
well, I just
Be less?
I just make a comment,
Mhm.
much like I did with Tony's presentation about, where do the numbers end up? I mean, if you look at governor's budget versus final for like things we actually know, it's within $100,000 every year. I mean,
But we don't know final.
no,
It's
but,
final.
but it seems like it's within $100,000 every year for the last 5 years. So whatever the governor comes out with for FY21,
Right.
we could probably take 100 off that or whatever, if you want to be conservative. But it's going to be close. It's not going to be $1 million number. It's going to be
Right.
probably a tens of thousands number, and definitely not a multi-hundred thousands dollars number, unless something really weird happens.
So the final numbers, and as you know, we just said they haven't come out yet, and we've already got the budget for 2020. So a lot of this is a timing thing as well. I find that makes it difficult when we're trying to budget, when timing of things don't fall into place with when we need to have, a budget finally approved. So you do have to be conservative during the process. So it's not like they come in really hot, much higher final numbers. Same thing with the Chapter 71. They did come in a little bit more, but a lot has to do with how this program works. It's a truly reimbursement program. So when they give us an estimate, they're estimating on a prior year. And when we actually give them actually 2 years before, when we finally give them our final spending numbers for the year right before the new year, that number can be more because it's obviously based on, another year and increases in the cost. So we'll always see a little bit of an increase maybe in this area, provided based on what percentage they are able to fund. And again, when I said about subject to appropriation, they may one year fund us at 71%. That's what we got last year. Some years we've gotten 63% of what we've spent in the regular ed transportation area. So that number changes as well, what they're able to fund. So not only does what we've spent change, but what they're able to fund as a rate coming back to. So looking at that, we can figure more or less what we're going to be spending based on our contract, but we still don't know what their rate's going to be.
Can I throw out there too that this Chapter 71 is only really for regular transportation. So all the special ed transportation comes out of our school budget, which can vary child to child, year to year. And sometimes the transportation for some of these children almost costs as much as the tuition. So we have no control over that, and that's not reflected in any of this reimbursement. Just wasn't sure if you were aware of.
So it looks like there's a huge swing in some years. I'm looking at the 71 between the governor's budget and final. The actual, even like in 19, like governor's budget went down by 4%, but then the final was up by 12, but then the actual was up. Is that simply timing again, or is it?
Again, it's the fact that they're giving us an estimate based on 2 years ago. And now they finally get the real number, and then they finally decide what percentage.
Right.
So it's so yeah.
Right.
So it's kind of all over, and you can tell when you're finished with the end of the year. I can look at this year and say, I know how much money I have now for them to reimburse me on. I can try to figure out what percentage they used for their estimate and try to, but I'm still probably going to be off if they go up on their percentage of reimbursement.
What does it usually cost? This is what you get in chapter, not 100%. You have to come up within the budget.
It's over, yeah.
The exception of special.
For the regular transportation, I believe we're up around $2 million a year. Mm-hmm.
From the
In the budget, we put in $2 million.
The difference from
Above and beyond.
from the Chapter
Excuse me.
71 monies?
You have to come up with another $2 million.
Right, but
above
that's
the two-
also
two-
special ed
okay.
in there.
That
Right.
includes-
That's regular ed, but here's special ed as
Right.
well.
So
So-
our transportation budget total,
But on the
3.7 million,
But that includes
more
special
than that.
needs.
correct.
That would include special needs, plus it also is deducting what we're estimating for reimbursement from the state. It's more than the 3.7.
Oh,
It would
so the
be-
3.7 is what we're actually dividing up in the.
Right, after
Our
we've
cost.
gotten our reimbursement.
I'm super, and it's very easy to do. Don't worry. We're getting like $2 million from the state, and they're allegedly reimbursing us 71%
We're
of the
spending
cost.
$2 million in the regular ed transportation area, and we're getting maybe 60 some odd % back.
Yeah, I'm just going by the note
no,
over
this
here
is
that
off the
says
top of
using
my head,
71.
but I know it was around
Yeah.
$2 million.
So we're spending $2 million, and we're getting $1.4 million,
And
and
each year it's-
then the rest of it, the regular ed's $2 million. We're getting 1.4 from the state. I'm using big round numbers.
Yep.
And then we're spending 3.7, which gets us up to total of revenue that needs to go to transportation 5.1. And,
For everything.
but there's no reimbursement for special ed, which is
None.
why it drives it up. Okay. I just had to work
Okay.
it through in my mind.
And I'm trying to remember all my numbers. I didn't bring my budget with me, unfortunately.
You get the new one that you just used the year.
I took, the 71%, I took the ones that are highlighted in yellow, the amounts there, the 65%. I was looking to see if there was a trend, and when I didn't see a really good trend, I thought I better be very conservative and take the lowest numbers, which were the 0.65% and the 0.77%. Something up from 65 and
I think Tony was
No,
on
I
a
mean, the
different line.
71% reimbursement.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was still on the top. I'm sorry. No, I shouldn't. I'm terribly, that's wrong. Oh, wait a minute, no. I'm looking at the other number, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the top, looking at the .71. That's what we got this year, 71%. I'm sorry, you're right, that was what the rate.
But is it often high 60s, low 70s, somewhere in
Yeah,
that range?
it's
I mean,
around
who
in
knows?
there.
Who knows
Some
whether it's
years
going to be
I've seen
65 or
58.
75?
Yeah.
But it's certainly never going to be 100,
No,
and it's certainly never going to be 20. But it's in that
no, I wouldn't say it would be 20. but
60 to 80
I've seen
range.
58, I've seen, in the
And
50s.
we've advocated, through Angelo D'Amelia and folks, Ways and Means, get that Chapter 70 number up. Last year, he had contacted me. I had reached out and he had asked what he wanted me to advocate for. I said 100%. He goes, well, that's what the language states, 100%. He says, well, we want to get up to 80. I said, at that point, that's another 10%. We'll take it.
Yeah.
Contacted me, said, it looks like it's a go. And then at the 11th hour, they changed the Chapter 71 number. So, we did not get that additional funding.
It's consistent, right?
Yeah, and
It's
we've-
consistent. Others aren't getting 80%.
No,
It's
no,
consistent.
everybody gets it. And we are members of the Mass Association of Regional School Committees, MARS, a school district called MARS, and they have been advocating for years for the 100, because that's what with this fighting with the state, that that was the deal, that we would get 100% reimbursement. So they're out there doing that, and obviously, and talking to our local. So that is the Chapter 71, and I don't know if you want to go into anything else, question Medicaid or.
So looking at the last sheet, you touched upon this before. So the top line is basically your certified E&D. The two additional lines are your appropriations.
What we've
Pretty
used of it.
self-explanatory.
And you can see it's a 2-year difference between what year the money was from, to the point where it got certified, to the point where it can be used.
Certification process, that kind of like our free cash process, where you look at your actual expenditures, you've closed out your book, what your revenue versus
There's a
expenses
whole
are. And
checklist that we have to go through with the Mass DOR and do the whole thing with the statement of indebtedness and bank. We get whole copies of our details of our budget.
I'm aware of the time. I did want to leave a little bit of time for Tony to do the air model. But I wanted to see if there was anything else that.
All right, the second document that you'll get is really based on the total revenue projections from the prior tab that I walked. So what we do is we pull out what your prior year levy limit was, what your 2.5 increase, your new growth, offset by those allowances, the excess capacity. And remember, I said we offset because the 69,645 that we have to pay for exemptions reimbursed, that's really an offset to the 175. So we show it as an offset in calculating what we have for revenue sharing. The unrestricted general government and the state-owned land for the two that aren't reimbursable or offsetting our expenses. The Chapter 70 offset our costs of out-of-district for vocational schools, and there's veterans reimbursement benefit that, those are offsetting what we budget, right? Don't look at that as a, and it does flow through the general fund, but we don't look at sharing that particular revenue because it's offsetting directly expense budget. Not 100%, but at some percentage. And in the local receipts, these are the categories that we believe do not, fees that are not charged a lot, like you look at your parking fees, your athletic fees, those are in fact offsetting costs have is how you're funding it. So some of the fees that we have, like our fire alarm box fee. So we got to send out 2 firefighters. They got to go spend a few hours out there. We might get $50 for that particular box. We consider that fee an offset to the cost. Because whereas motor vehicle excise, we consider that a general revenue. Other excise, the meals, the room, the boat, penalties and interest on tax, because it ties to your property tax, ties to your motor vehicle excise tax. We consider that a revenue that's shared. License and permit, those all have to do with building, that's the building piece, and the alcohol licenses, all the recurring and one time due to building that's going on, we share that component as well. So you said 45,728 in property tax, 4,288,000 in cherry sheet, and 4,720,000 in local receipt. So we break that down based on the last estimate we had as a percent. I was back to 2017 when I first started doing the revenue sheet. Council and the town manager, 51% of the budget, excluding debt, was Bridgewater, 49% was school. So that's where we came up with this formula. So as you walk across this document later on, you'll see that we estimate, again, projections. We just like to do this so that we can have a view. And the reason we do this is we know we're not going to have windfalls of hundreds of thousands. We may not be 3.26%, but we may be 0.2, or we may be 3.31. So there's a narrow enough estimate so that we can begin our planning process. So that's what we have for 21. And as you can see, as I go up further, I flatline a lot of the revenue because I do not know what the economy is going to be. So we roll this forward constantly. So as of today's documentation and the projections and all the information that I showed over here in this document, it flows, and this is what you would see if these all numbers came through for a planned increase for your 21 budget, 22 budget, 3 budget, and 24. And that's all being driven by the other document. I think I need to go into more of an explanation.
Those numbers, there's the number like
972 plus 934. Yeah.
So we expect 1 million in new revenue.
That's correct.
Next year, essentially.
Tony, what do they do with the assessors do with the overlay reserve?
The overlay reserve, matter of fact, we're slowly drawing that down. We will put that in a capital stabilization fund. So right now, there's a request that will be going out. So annually, what will happen is a request will go to them, just as with the free cash, and then we put through an order to distribute that money to our either stabilization fund, capital stabilization fund, and so forth.
In the last years,
we did 200 a year ago. I think we're going to do another 200. Now that we got our personal property tax straightened out, all our old personal property tax, we have some unsecured real estate tax. We got hit with the Burger King property out there on 24, so we have like $300,000 that's just sitting there. And until we get a disposition in bankruptcy court, the DOR is going to require us to reserve that whole $300,000. The last time I checked, we were at $1 million. we'll be down to 800,000, and we've slowly reduced the amount that we're putting away each year. When I first came on board, I think they were putting on 250 to 275 in overlay. We don't need that. Now we're down to 175. So we're weaning ourselves off that. I'm looking to get that number down to $500,000 and looking to keep that balance about that.
And so just follow up question. Overlay.
Tom was a treasurer collector.
Yeah. No, overlay was a great way to act back when I had no money to hide, quote unquote. But I don't want to do that anymore. I want it to be transparent, and I think you do too.
That's why there's always
that's why
an
we're trying
order.
to bring it down
Correct.
and put it into the appropriate stabilization funds if it's not needed.
Yeah, the town and the staff, I can't say enough for the work they've done over the last 4.5 years. They got their act together. They've really worked hard, and that's what we're trying to do so that there's nothing that we're hiding. I want to make available every nickel and dime that I can make available to you folks. And yes, we're going to be bringing that down even further. But it will be transparent. It will be go to those one-time or capital stabilization.
One of the things I wanted to point out, I know you had a different formula. Veterans benefits are really a pass-through benefit sheet.
Yes.
So that we get like $150,000 in as revenue, but $150,000 is provided as benefit to.
Right. And I just pulled it up. That's on the detailed sheet. You'll see that 75% reimbursed. So that's why we don't clear that, because it's offsetting what the veteran agent sends in for reimbursement, kind of like a Medicaid.
Tony, do you anticipate, and have you talked to any of your colleagues how this will be handled, state portion of immigration?
Yeah, I was going to ask that if are you going to be benefiting from that?
Not from recreational.
Recreational?
Either will, I believe Rainham won't either, because both towns don't have. So, as far as the state, how will they incorporate towns' portions?
A check will show up someday, and we'll ask what it's for.
Okay. It's not going to be built into state aid. We don't know how they're going to handle that.
Am I wrong?
No, you're not.
Smart about that. I do not have an answer for you.
There's a formula.
The recreation.
Yeah, you're talking about the pullback from the state that's going to be dispersed, not for the local 3% or whatever percent you can add on for retail sales. Do not know the number.
But they haven't finished that formula.
No.
So it could be like the lottery formula, which we don't get a large portion. Other centers higher.
Yeah, and it could. That would make sense if that's how they would calculate it.
Could be $100,000.
It could be. It could be. And in that case, it would fit into the shareable model, just like we've done with our medical mitigation.
So if there's information that someone has, please.
Seen anything yet? I've been tracking closely.
I kind of figured you'd be on the marijuana train there, Mr. Wood.
Tony, is all this stuff online, did you say?
I know the documents are here, and I'll email them to the group if you'd like. Oh, yes. Oh. 10.
So
I don't need one.
while they're going around, so I was thinking we could do this for expenses. Hopefully, it takes shorter period of time. I don't know what everybody's schedule is for the rest of the summer in the middle of my vacation, so I can work at some point. I think we have August 6th as a council meeting, but that's our only council meeting month. We could try to pick another date mid-month, if that works for everybody. Third week.
Come on. Before they,
Yeah, before they get busy with the,
That's conflict. Yeah, I gotta try to think what we.
We have a budget meeting on 13th.
see what he's on.
but you have, during that meeting, you have your own. It doesn't have to be a Tuesday.
We want to. What day do we say?
So do we know what on the agenda for that? We maybe
You didn't want any?
I'm just
gotta.
all I'm doing is
Right now, I have a schedule.
you can't do.
This ended up being
We did 6.
it's going to be tight.
We can keep that. We can keep that agenda super. The only thing I'm really looking at the amount of people coming in, and I'm hoping I'm not. Special ed numbers are.
Breathing in paperback.
So if we do a 6:30, 7,
Okay, on which day?
the 13th.
13th?
Could we do 7:30? That would make it sure we're not late.
7:30?
I'm fine with
Okay.
This has been actually very.
So for the sake of time, and we'll hold our meeting.
Just post it.
I'll double check with Ann tomorrow.
Going, that's, was that a Wednesday night?
Okay.
Tuesday, but we
Tuesday
can
night,
even
so-
go in one of those smaller. Don't have to be in this.
Only
wanna
that
get stuck
there's
in
only
downtown with
the
what we have.
recordings in this room.
Bill,
Yeah, I think we can probably get this room for the 13th. Okay, good. So we'll communicate that around. That's great. Is there anything else anyone wanted to talk about? We have public.
We already spoke.
We already spoke. Anything else?
the motion during the
Moved?
Motion to adjourn
I make a motion.
the subcommittee.
All right, we are adjourned.
We did.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Yeah.